everyone. Today I have a new episode. I want to dive a little bit deeper on the subject of RED-S, or Relative Energy Deficiency in sports. RED-S was mentioned in a previous episode of the podcast last season by one of the athletes I've interviewed, and I'll link our conversation in the episode's notes if you want to listen to that conversation again. But today I really wanted to dive a bit deeper on this subject to understand better what it is, how to prevent it, and how to recover from it. I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and as always, you can find all the links of my research in the show notes of the episode. First, I want to answer the question, what is it? So, RED-S is defined as a syndrome of impaired physiological and or psychological functioning experienced by female and male athletes that is caused by exposure to problematic, usually prolonged and or severe, low energy availability. Some of the consequences of RED-S includes decrease in energy metabolism, decrease reproductive function, musculoskeletal health, immunity, glycogen synthesis, cardiovascular and hematological health, which can all individually or synergetically lead to impaired well-being, increase injury risk, and decrease sports performance. But I'll explain that more into details a bit later in the episode. So the most important thing to understand about RED-S is that it occurs when the caloric intake is not enough to sustain the body's requirements. And this syndrome can happen to male and female athletes, although in this episode specifically, I will focus more on female athletes because it is recognized by health professionals as the female athlete triad. So the triad is a reference to a medical condition often observed in physically active girls and women, and it involves, as the name suggests, three components. The first one is low energy availability with or without disordered eating. The second is menstrual dysfunction, and the third is low bone mineral density. Now, although RED-S has been recognized as part of this triad, in 2014, the International Olympic Committee, or IOC, described the impacts of low energy availability beyond those outlined by the triad. And that's really what we're going to look into today. So I will put an image on the screen if you are on YouTube that was published in 2023 by the IOC in a special edition of the British Journal of Sports Medicine about RED-S. I will also link this edition if you want to read some of the articles that are very interesting and go into depth about specific topics related to RED-S in the show notes. So, if you look at this image, it shows you what are the effects of RED-S on women's health. Of course, in terms of health consequences, they vary from one individual to another, but what can happen is when an athlete has low energy availability, it can impair their reproductive function, meaning that it can make periods irregular or even absent, as well as changing the hormone levels associated with the menstrual cycle, and it can cause a reduction in sex drive. It can also impair their bone health by lowering the athlete's bone mineral density, increase the risk of bone stress injury, and decrease bone strength. In the long run, this can lead to osteoporosis, which weakens bones and makes them so brittle that a fall or even mild stresses such as bending over or even coughing can cause a break. RED-S can also impair gastrointestinal function, which means that athletes may experience abnormal bowel movements as well as cramping, bloating, and pain. It can also disturb their metabolism and thus impact their thyroid, lower their resting metabolic rate, reduce their leptin, which is a hormone that regulates the energy balance in the body, and or increase their cortisol, which is the stress hormone. Low energy availability can affect one's hematological function. So what happens is that iron, which is an essential nutrient that is used in the formation of new blood cells, as well as blood cells' ability to carry the oxygen, and that's super important in sports because you need a lot of oxygen in the muscles to function and to perform, so the iron levels can become low. That might be for different reasons. It can be because the body's ability to absorb iron decreased, or maybe because the hemoglobin, which is the protein containing iron that facilitates the transportation of oxygen, decreases, or it can be also for other reasons. Athletes who suffer from RED-S may also experience a bunch of other symptoms such as urinary incontinence, impaired glucose and lipid metabolism, disturbed sleep, impaired cardiovascular and neurocognitive function, reduced skeletal muscle function and immunity, and impaired growth and development. This is very important if you consider the fact that elite athletes often start very early, and if their growth and development is impaired because of RED-S, you can have people who don't go through healthy growth and puberty too. Now, before I touch on the impacts on the athlete's performance, I would also like to mention the fact that RED-S can also impact their mental health. I know I gave you a bunch of physical effects of low energy availability, but it's not only physical, it can very much be mental. Also, a side note, mental health issues can both cause but also be caused by low energy availability. So for example, a diagnosed eating disorder or other medical conditions can often drive restricted energy intake, leading to the onset of RED-S. Not eating enough could also, and thus having a low energy availability, could also trigger mental health issues. Additionally, low energy availability has been shown to negatively impact several aspects of psychological well-being, including depression, eating disorders, and exercise addiction. And so, as you can pretty much imagine, all these physical and mental symptoms can impact the athlete's ability to perform, not only in terms of being able to show up to practice or competitions due to injuries, but also in terms of their level of performance. The muscle strength, the endurance, the power, and the cognitive skills might not be the same as they used to be, and the recovery time might be longer than usual. And of course, the motivation might not be the same either, just because you see that you don't recover as fast, or that your performance is not as good as it once was. So the best thing to prevent all of that happening is to be aware of the first signs. Since everyone's experience is different, it's hard to focus on only one aspect, but some early physical signs might be an unexplained fatigue or lack of energy, maybe weight loss or frequent illness or recurrent injuries. Also, decreased sports performance, decreased response to training stimulus, low libido or change in menstrual function, disruption to puberty, difficulty maintaining a warm body temperature, and also iron deficiency. It's also important to look at psychological signs, such as an athlete maybe is feeling a bit more depressed, or there's an increase in their irritability, or a decrease in their concentration or coordination, desire maybe to skip rest days, maybe a drive for thinness, or an avoidance of meals or food groups, maybe also feeling the need to earn one's food, and also body dysmorphia. Another important factor to prevent RED-S is to be more informed, and I'm speaking of coaches telling that to their athletes, and also having maybe more prevention days in training or something like that. Because, for example, if you take female athletes, they tend to believe that menstrual dysfunction is a normal effect of exercising, but it isn't. It's also important for athletes to give their body the necessary nutrition and hydration. As more research is done in sports medicine to understand how the female body works, the more knowledge you get about what is needed to ensure proper nutrition and hydration. It's unfortunately really easy to underfuel, even if it's done unintentionally. So it's important to make sure that athletes eat enough carbs and energy-dense foods, that they try to eat consistently throughout the day, and also make sure they get enough of important micronutrients such as calcium, iron, magnesium, vitamin D, potassium, etc. Finally, before ending this episode, I wanted to quickly touch on the recovery process. Of course, I'm no doctor, and those are only like the recommendations that have been done by specialists, but it might take a while to get healthy again, especially if an athlete has suffered from RED-S for a very long time. And since this syndrome can be caused by various factors, the current guidelines suggest that the best treatment for such conditions comes from a multidisciplinary care team comprised of physicians, dietitians, and also mental health professionals. It's really important to take those three different aspects together. And that's all for today. I hope you learned a lot from this episode. As I said, I will link my research in the show notes so you can read more about it. RED-S is a complex subject that is still currently being researched, so there's still a lot to learn. And as I said in other episodes, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on female athletes, specifically on how their body works, etc. So we, in the coming years, will probably see more knowledge and more detailed approach to those things. But I'll give you all the links I have in the description of the episode. I will also link a website which keeps track of the latest studies on RED-S if you are interested in getting to know the latest research on the subject. Now, thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow, to share the episode around, and I'll see you in the next one.